Yeah. Would at least just half. Yeah, that's excellent. Okay. Tasif, are you okay?
Okay, hi everyone, thanks for coming. Just going to introduce our panel for the night. Mehri Niknam, she is the Executive Director of the Joseph Interfaith Foundation, who organised this event. She was awarded an MBE in 2005 for her contributions to Muslim-Jewish relations in Britain and was made an honorary fellow at the Leeds Centre for Jewish Education in the same year. Then we have Dr. Abdul-Basit Shaikh, lecturer in the Department of Arabic and Middle Eastern Studies at this university, and a tutor in the Lifelong Learning Department. He's a member of the Kirklees Faith Forum, where he's actively involved in championing interfaith issues. He's an author of the book Medieval and Modern Concepts of Creation in the Abrahamic Religions. And then we have Dr. Eva Frojmovic, founder of the Centre of Jewish Studies at this university, who currently teaches in the School of Fine Art, History of Art and Cultural Studies. So,
thank you. Okay, I will speak. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thank you very much for coming to this evening's talk. Just to give you a very short introduction to the Joseph Interfaith Foundation. Joseph Interfaith Foundation is a joint Muslim-Jewish interfaith organizations. We are unique in that way that most interfaith foundations work on 3 faiths. We work only on 2 faiths. Tonight we also have with us Tasif Zaman, who is the project coordinator for the foundation. He's a student at LSE. You can talk to him furthermore. In advance, I thank the speakers. The areas that the foundation works on are basically 3. We specialize on university students and seminars, religious leaders, and academics. This is an example of the seminars that we hold with students, but also the one that we are holding at all other universities this year is called Freedom of Religion in Britain Today. So maybe we'll hold one as well here later. The religious leadership is our Council of Imams and Rabbis, which consists of the senior imams of major mosques in London and senior rabbis of major synagogues in London, representing across the board the diversity within each community. You can see their projects on our website, josephInterfaithFoundation.org. We have a comprehensive website which you can look at. Please do and get in touch. I'm not going to do any of this, which I was going to do. Just about the book. The book is the proceedings of an international seminar which we held in association with Exeter University and London University about 2 years ago. And however, the book is not merely a compilation of those papers, but a cohesive work which is based on the thematic groupings of the 2 major topics of the conference, namely the socio-historic and theological roots of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and their similarities. This was the first conference where the 2 concepts were studied side by side in order to show that they both are the 2 sides of the same coin of xenophobia. Normally there are conferences on Islamophobia and conferences on anti-Semitism, but we felt that the similarities are so great that the 2 should be studied together in order to really express the importance of the 2. So we are hoping that challenging the views which that they say they are 2 completely separate concepts and not have any similarities. The broader purpose is to promote a constructive effort on confronting both these scourges of time. We hope that it makes a meaningful contribution, clarifying the origins, meaning and implications of the two concepts, and that it will work further towards a constructive resource for the students and academics. With that, I stop and I invite Dr. Abdul-Basit Shaikh to give us his talk tonight. I've just been told by Tassi, who knows everything and tells me everything, that we also have a very comprehensive Facebook. So if you just go to www.josephinterfaithfoundation.org, which gives us your, which gives you our our website, on the top right-hand corner there is the Facebook. If you just press on it, and so you will see if you join the friends of the Facebook.
Yeah, as we say, it's a page. I mean, you can even just search on the actual Facebook. And we've recently uploaded all the pictures from Interfaith. So we have the seminar at the LSE, the visits of the imams in the synagogues in North London, and everything is basically there. So
and also the Mothers of Faith.
Mothers of Faith visits.
If you need any technical information, please ask us. I don't ask. I'm a technophobe.
First of all, I'm going to be basically giving a 15-minute talk on Islamophobia. Probably my gathering 15 minutes is not a great deal of time in terms of addressing such a huge issue that's affecting the Muslim community. So for that purpose, what I've done is my strategy is to look at Islamophobia from a lexical perspective, then looking at the topic from a socio-historical perspective, then moving on to the theological perspective. And whilst I was doing my research on this topic, I thought it'd be very important in terms of developing future strategies and future techniques in terms of how to address the issue of Islamophobia as far as the Muslim community in the United Kingdom is concerned. So I hope that you get a great deal out of the presentation that I'm about to give you, and I hope it basically facilitates or gets you thinking in terms of questions that you may want to ask during the questions and answer session. So first of all, when we actually look at Islamophobia, I think it's very important that we first look at the actual the term. What do we mean by the term phobia? And if you look at the basic definition in the English dictionary, we find that the term phobia refers to, gives an indication of a feeling such as fear or distress. So in respect of the actual term Islamophobia itself, we find that it is classed as what's called a neologism, where we combine the term Islam, merge it together with the word phobia, and we have a new term or a new word called Islamophobia. So in the context of Muslims and Islam in the United Kingdom, one can define Islamophobia as being a fear, a hatred, or irrational fear of Muslims. So, you know, many of, in terms of real life examples, if we look at the events of, if we look at the events after the 9/11 attacks in New York, we find that within the United Kingdom, if a Muslimah or a Muslim woman was actually walking down the street in a veil or in a niqab or hijab or even the burqa, for example, she found herself maybe subject to you know, physical abuse, violence, emotional abuse, and you know, verbal abuse, ranging from ranging from insults against Islam or the Prophet Muhammad, and also going all the way to attacks on mosques and you know, Muslim places of worship. So these are real life practical practical events that have basically occurred within the last 10 years since the attacks on New York and Washington on 9/11. So we also can argue that the events of 9/11 really basically meant that the word Islamophobia came into the mainstream vocabulary right around the world. So people from America going all the way to China, we find that Islamophobia is a term that's being used more and more often. And some people have assumed that Islamophobia only came about, or the term only began to be got common currency within the last 10 years. So we will see in a moment that the term Islamophobia came about in entirely different surroundings. So if you move on to the third point, if you look at the views of Alphonse Dinet, who was actually a painter, an artist in France, and Slimane bin Ibrahim, who was actually a philosopher in France, they were the first individuals that actually coined this phrase Islamophobia, or in the French Islamophobie, in 1910. If we look at modern usages in comparison, we find that in 1997, the British Running Trust was the first organization that actually defined Islamophobia in a modern context. So they are the first organization that's credited with actually studying the phenomenon of Islamophobia in the United Kingdom. So they carried out a study that was unrivaled or unparalleled. And they actually, in terms of defining Islamophobia, they defined it as being the dread or the hatred of Islam, and therefore to the fear and dislike of all Muslims. So in respect of looking at the socio-historic roots of Islamophobia, as I was saying earlier, that the term Islamophobia came into, was being used in the West in 1910. And whilst I was doing my research, I was quite surprised to find that the actual term was coined by some liberal Muslims and feminists. So what I mean by a liberal Muslim is a person who is actually a Muslim, who believes in the one God, who believes in Tawheed or monotheism, and who actually accepts Muhammad as the last messenger. But these Muslims would be secular in outlook. So even today in many Muslim societies we have tensions within the Muslim societies between so-called moderates, extremists, and or fundamentalists, or liberals. So in this case, liberal Muslims of a secular outlook, and feminists use this, develop this term in order to basically define their, the fears and the concerns they had in respect of those who had a fundamental approach to Islam, could be known as fundamentalists, and in some corners or in some areas are known as extremists. So if we look at the views of Alan Quillen, he actually wrote composed a PhD thesis in 1910, and the main effects of his thesis basically portrayed Muslims as being barbaric, hostile, and uncivilized. And those of us who basically who have read about Arab and Islamic civilization within the last 1500 years, or 1400 years should I say, will see that there is a huge contrast in terms of those who argue that Islam contributed so much to Europe. I mean, if we look at the views of Nick Clegg, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, he argued that Europe wouldn't be what it is if it wasn't for the contribution of Islam, Arabs and Muslims, during between the years of 700 and 1400 AD. So going back to Alan Quillen, these kind of views at that time were hardly surprising, because for the last thousand years, Christians and Muslims have had good relations, interfaith relations, and have also had there's been times where they haven't had good relations, and some examples can be in the case of the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition. So if we look at moving on to the last 30 years, we find that during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, this phrase was used by US forces and US military personnel to basically describe the occupation of Afghanistan, because the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan was part of this Cold War between the West and the East. So it was the West pitted against Russia, and both the West and the Russia had their proxies or had their satellites vying for control to ensure that the West prevailed over the East, or the East prevailed over the West. So I've already addressed this issue about the Runnymede report. However, the Runnymede report highlighted open and closed factors. So what we mean by closed factors in relation to the Runnymede report, the actual report summed up certain feelings against Muslims and Islam in general. So the Runnymede report basically was of the highlighted that Muslims were seen as inward, Muslims were seen as backward, not being open or responsive to the challenges of modern society, was seen as being unresponsive to modern challenges, unresponsive to Islam was seen as something that was the opposite of Western civilization. So the Runnymede report did highlight a number of issues showing how Muslims and Islam were being portrayed in the Western world. And the last point in relation to the socio-historic roots of Islamophobia, I'm of the opinion, or I'm of the view that much of the resentment against Muslims in the last 20 years has occurred because Muslims have begun to basically have got aspirations, have aspired to become doctors, teachers, accountants, and lawyers. So if you look at the Asian community's contribution towards this country, the Asian community, like with many communities such as the Muslim community, the Jewish communities, had very humble beginnings, where many of the people worked in the factories, were classed as the working class, whereas in the last few years, in many ethnic groups, in many faiths, many people have actually gone to university, gone education, and have basically got onto the social ladder. So whereas you had many Muslims and Jews in the lower socio-economic categories, and in low-level jobs, many Muslims have gone to highly skilled and highly professional jobs. So I live in a town called Buckley, not very far from here, and I've noticed that there's been a real role reversal where many Muslims, many Asians have basically got or managed to secure highly skilled employment, whereas you see the white working class people being left behind. And I was because I'm part of the Kirklees Faiths Forum, I had certain discussions with Christian clergymen, and they were of the opinion that much of the white working class has actually stopped engaging in education, is one because religion has been removed from their life, and as a consequence of that, many of the white working class have basically failed to actually engage in education, and this has meant that as a class structure, they've as a people, they've actually remained gone behind in society.
Sorry, yeah. Excuse me for interjecting, ladies and gentlemen. I forgot to stress that please do not record the talk this evening. You're welcome to take notes and speak with the speakers afterwards about the notes, but it is not allowed to record the talks, so please do not record the talk. Thank you. Take your time. Yes.
Right, so now I want to move on to the theological roots of Islamophobia. So some of you may basically have studied Islam from a historical or from a theological perspective. So it is quite interesting to see that when we look at Islamophobia in a medieval perspective, one can see that the first Islamophobes, or those who were basically against Islam, are seen in the form of the tribe in Mecca that the Prophet Muhammad was actually part of, known as the Quraysh. So when the Prophet Muhammad was given the mantle of prophethood at the age of 40, when he was instructed by God to basically present the message of monotheism or Tawheed to the Arabs, we find that the tribe that Muhammad actually belonged to, he actually found, he encountered hostility, suspicion, hatred and enmity, from his own kinsmen and from his own tribe. So because if you, those of you who are aware of Islam, you find that before the advent of Islam, many of the Arabs believed in the one God, and at the same time were polytheists, that they engaged in idolatry and engaged in polytheism. So you find that if you look at the views of Philip Hitti in his book History of the Arabs, one finds that Muhammad basically came and actually was such a force for change that he ended up transforming the whole of the Middle East from a socio-cultural, religious perspective, that the whole social moral order and religious order of pre-Islamic Arabia was actually completely transformed by the advent of Islam. So you find that the resentment and the hostility from the Quraysh, the Prophet Muhammad's tribe, they were the first Islamophobes, that in terms of the fact that they saw Muhammad as a major threat to their values, to their belief and to their power in Meccan and Medinan society. So if we look at the time after the advent of Islam, we see that over the last 1,000 or 1,100 years, we see great tensions between Islam and Christianity, because as far as many Christians and Jews were concerned, they saw Islam as the new kid on the block. So Islam, very similar to Judaism in respect of the adherence to strict monotheism. So what I mean by strict monotheism is belief in the one God, whereas Christianity had what's called a refined monotheism, where you see the God the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit being fused into this entity called the Godhead. So we find that because both faiths were competing for influence and for power, in different parts of the world, we see that Christianity and Islam have had a checkered history in relation to the fact that there's been good times and bad times in respect of conflicts and peace between the two communities. So we only have to look at the example of John of Damascus to see that we find that certain attitudes were developed amongst people of other faiths in relation to how they viewed Islam. So many of the negative views, attitudes towards Islam have occurred due to the fact that Islam is seen as a new kid on the block and offering a challenge to other faiths and to other cultures. Some people are basically who have studied Islam see Islam as a peaceful religion. Some of those who basically who are not open-minded have seen Islam as a threat or as a challenge. So it all comes down to the individual in terms of once have they correctly studied the scriptures, have they studied the faiths and religions in order to basically come to an acceptable conclusion. So we find that events such as the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition reinforced medieval Islamophobia, and again that's as a direct consequence of religions competing with one another. Because if you look at Christianity and Islam, we find that they're missionary religions, missionary faiths, where the call is being made to the people in order to come to Christianity or come to Islam. So when you see two powers or two faiths competing with one another, it's inevitably going to evoke suspicion, hatred and distrust between religions. So that brings me on to finally maybe what could be considered as being the most interesting part of the talk that I've actually delivered this evening, which is what practical solutions can we propose or remedies can we propose to combat Islamophobia. So I mean, I mean, from my experience, having spoken to people who've been victims of Islamophobia, many Muslims who basically are doing everyday tasks such as going shopping or going to the mosque or engaging in social activities, it seems that many Muslims who have a particular dress such as the niqab or the hijab or the actual thawb, the actual costume, those people who are dressed in Arab or Muslim attire seem to basically be singled out, for many attacks. So we've had imams, we've had Muslim men and women being dressed in Islamic attire, being singled out for abuse, being singled out, for physical violence. Some of the effects on the people have been, truly horrifying. So, I mean, one of the remedies or the solutions we can put in place to address Islamophobia could be the imposition of tougher penalties. So this is something that the Ministry of Justice would have to basically look at, the government, the Home Office. I do believe that the Home Office does have a panel that looks at race, hate crime and Islamophobia. So it could be something that could be looked at a governmental level and a national level, in order to have stricter penalties, punishments for those who basically single out people of faith and people who are not of faith. For example, Jews, Christians, lesbians, gays, because we find that gay hate crime, lesbian hate crime, we find transgender crime. There's different types of crime, and there's different types of people being affected in way even there's disability hate crime. So I think there needs to be, from a governmental level, there needs to be stricter penalties, punishments, so that it acts as a deterrent. So those people who wish to, who have a desire to basically single out people of faith, of people of non-faith, or different peoples, that they basically see that there are strict, tough punishments out there that will deter these people from carrying out these heinous crimes. As far as Muslims are concerned, having been involved in interfaith work for just over a year, I have basically done some thinking and have had discussions with many members of the Muslim community in my local area, and I'm always stressing the need that Muslims need to basically, Muslims, as well as Jews and Christians, need to basically, be more confident and not be inhibited by fear, and be confident in terms of expressing or or portraying Islam, and Jews and Christians need to do the same in terms of portraying Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in a positive manner. So rather than let the media, television, newspaper hijack the agenda in terms of portraying faiths in a particular manner, Muslims need to do a lot more in terms of engaging with the wider public. Mosques should really open themselves up, to basically other faiths, other communities, other cultures, to show what Islam is. And there's just a mosque up the road, the Mecca Mosque. Imam Qari Asim, he does a fantastic job. Every year he opens the mosque up to people of different faiths, different cultures, and I think interfaith councils have a major role to play in terms of bringing people together in order to exchange ideas and exchange views, in order to create better community cohesion. So Muslims really need to be confident, in terms of showing what Islam is, what the Islamic position on a variety of issues are. The third issue that Muslims need to be engaging in order to combat Islamophobia is highlight the differences between culture and Islam. And unfortunately, the media, what they've done is a lot of cultural practices, they actually pass them off as being Islamic, when in fact there is in reality there is a major difference between cultural practices and Islamic practices. For example, many people in wider society assume that forced marriages or arranged marriages are Islamic, when in fact it's not the case. That the only way an Islamic marriage can be constituted is if the male and the female basically consent to actually get married. It's like, for example, if you enter into a contract, offer and acceptance equals agreement. So both Muslim and Muslimah, a female and a male Muslim, have to consent, have to agree to enter into a contract of marriage. So Muslims need to basically be more proactive in terms of highlighting the differences between culture and Islam. And the last point probably is going to be probably the most controversial point. that I'm going to make is that the mainstream media, even though one has to take into account freedom of speech and the right to a free press, the mainstream media does have a responsibility to portray a balanced and accurate views. I mean, some of you may basically be aware of the Daily Mail or certain Daily Mail articles, and many of the times they deliberately, to basically sell the papers, to generate income, they portray Islam in a very negative manner, and unfortunately this reinforces stereotypes and misconceptions about Islam, because it only needs one person to basically publish or put a headline in the story, and thousands of people can suddenly have an inaccurate view of Islam and Muslims, whereas if a person is actively trying to portray Islam in a positive manner, it can take many years, many months of hard work in order to portray Islam in a positive manner. So I hope through this talk I've given you some food for thought. It has acted as a catalyst for your questions and answers. And before I leave the stage, I'd like to thank Joseph Interfaith Foundation for giving me the opportunity to talk this evening. It's been a pleasure. And I'd also like to thank the Leeds University Islamic Society for giving me the opportunity to talk at this location. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shaikh. It's our pleasure and our privilege that you have accepted our invitation. I now invite Dr. Frojmovic, please, to give us her talk. Yes, there will be a long questions and answer sessions after the talk, so please be patient.
Can you hear me? Is this better? This is better, yes? I'd like to start by talking a little bit about my own work, and please, if you can't hear me at the back, please wave so that I know. Thank you. So I'd just like to talk about a little aspect of my own work. I teach, as Paulsia kindly mentioned, in the School of Fine Art, History of Art and Cultural Studies, which is a strange place. But the class that I teach, that I think has probably brought me here, is a class that I call the Margins of Medieval Art. And in the margins of medieval art, I suppose on the face of it, I'm talking about a relatively safe subject. I'm talking about medieval art, which is something that's art. Well, art is pleasant and decorative, and the medieval art is completely irrelevant because it's all in the past and all a long time ago, and so it's a safe subject that nobody needs to, in a way, worry about. But what I do there is I have sessions on different themes, and in these theme sessions we reflect on the past, but we're always forced to reflect on the present. And I devote 2 sessions at least, sometimes a little bit more, 3 sessions this year, on 3 weeks on the overlaps between what I would call Judeophobia in the Middle Ages and Islamophobia in the Middle Ages. You mentioned the Crusades a minute ago, and I think I'm just going to make the connection by starting out with a source from the First Crusade. The First Crusade was preached in the year 1095, according to the so-called Common Era, which is of course a Christian era that is now used by secular societies. It was preached in France and then took hold across Europe and involved Christian armies going on a military campaign to what they called the Holy Land in order to liberate, as they called it, the so-called Holy Sepulchre, that is the place in Jerusalem, where according to Christian traditions, Jesus was buried. And in the course of this crusade, various outrages were committed, some of which are known, especially anti-Jewish massacres against the Jews of Europe. Now, after the First Crusade, a Jewish chronicler wrote a chronicle that is a kind of a first-hand, a witness account of what had happened, and he tried to articulate the thinking of the Christian armies. And this is where I think we can make a connection. I'm going to paraphrase rather than quote. He says, more or less, that the Christians thought, here we are going to liberate the tomb of our Savior from the defilement of the Muslims. And we're going on such a long trip. But right here in the middle of us, here in France and Germany, there are some infidels living right here, the Jews. Why don't we just start with them? And so you can see that already in the Crusade there is a kind of crossover. The Crusaders are saying, oh, it's a long way, we're going on this long crusade to fight against the Muslims, but there's some other unbelievers living right here amongst us, and that's the Jews, who, after all, according to Christian traditions, it was believed that they had killed Jesus. So let's stop right here and take revenge and kill them. And this was the beginning of the massacres against the Jews, where the Jews of Europe were given the alternative to either convert to Christianity or die. And this is a very well documented history, but we know that many of the Jewish people actually chose to commit suicide rather than be forced to convert. Now, Mehri, you opened the proceedings by speaking of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia as two sides of the same coin, and that is of xenophobia. And I'd like to interrogate that a little bit, because when the Crusaders came to Cologne, they attacked a Jewish community who had lived there probably longer than they had lived there. So these were not foreigners. There is no way to say they were foreigners, because we now have a documented, uninterrupted history of the Jewish settlement in Cologne that goes all the way back to the Roman military camp that the Romans had set up in Cologne, which is called Cologne because of Colonia, it's a Roman colony. So these people were not foreigners, and I think that is one of the worrying things, that I think sometimes it is easy to say, oh, xenophobia is somehow it's a natural reaction against that which is, allegedly natural reaction against that which is foreign. But even in Britain, we could say that, by now, we're talking about the second, third generation of, well, we're talking about 4, 5, 6, maybe even, more generations of Jewish people living here, and 2 or 3 generations of people, of Muslims living here. How much longer? How long does it take to stop being a foreigner? How long can one talk about xenophobia as a kind of excuse? So in that sense, I'd like to suggest that the fact that in the First Crusade the Jews of medieval Europe were not really foreigners is perhaps a model to question this allegedly natural reaction against the foreigner, and to say that actually sometimes societies create strangers. They create strangers. They construct a category and they call them strangers. And these are decisions that are made, they're choices. And of course, when choices can be made differently. Now, I'm not going to bore you any further with historical facts, but I'd just like to talk about the power of the imagination and about tropes or metaphors. And the reason why I want to do that is to say that, to suggest that there is a potential continuity between Christian metaphors that are directed against Jews and what I would call post-Christian metaphors. That is, metaphors about Jewish, that are directed against Jews, and their link to a kind of forgotten Christianity. So even though we live in a largely secular society today, I would suggest to you that some of the negative ideas against other religions actually originate in half-forgotten or even completely forgotten ideas that come from Christianity. So, as an example, I'll just say a few words about Jews and money. Jews and money, it's still a very common trope, that is a metaphor, a sort of something, a stereotype, a prejudice that is still very, very common. And it's a little bit embarrassing. We don't like to talk about money, so, but this is one of the tropes, that Jews are rich, that Jews have a lot of money, and so on and so forth. And on the face of it, this is a secular idea. Superficially you could say this is a completely secular idea. It has nothing to do with Christianity. But for me as a medievalist, it has a lot to do with Christianity. Because the Middle Ages, the Christian people in the Middle Ages believed that Jews had killed Jesus, and they also believed that one of Jesus' own followers, Judas, had not only contributed but had actually betrayed and sold Jesus for money. This is effectively in the Bible. The Bible, that is the Christian bit of the Bible, the New Testament, tells us that Judas sold Jesus for a specified amount of money. And I think it's possible to trace this notion of Jews as Christ killers and Jews as somehow related to money and betrayal. It's possible to trace this to very ancient Christian ideas. Even though nowadays, most people in a secular society, they figured out that actually, if Jesus was a historical figure, he was executed by the Roman governors, by the Roman governor of Judea, and the Jews probably had very little to do with it, and were blamed for it later on. So most people nowadays are enlightened enough, even if they come from a Christian family, to say, oh yes, this is not to be taken seriously. We know that you can't blame the death of Jesus on the Jews, but this notion of some kind of a sinister association of Jews with money has remained. So we have to be aware of the way in which Christian metaphors and Christian stereotypes could over time mutate into post-Christian stereotypes. Okay, and some of the more blatant stereotypes against Jews that were used in the Middle Ages, yes, they have of course been forgotten. I'll just stick to this. This belief that Jewish people desecrated the host, which is a symbol of the Christian faith. This was something that was shown a lot in medieval Christian art. I teach about this in this class. It's one of the less pretty, less pleasant pictures. And the interesting thing about this image for me is that it was made in England. It was made in England for a Christian audience, and it was made at a time when there were no Jewish people living in England. The Jewish people had actually been officially expelled by the King of England over 100 years before this manuscript was painted, was illuminated. And so I think it's useful to also reflect on the possibilities of the functions of anti-Judaism, possibly also of Islamophobia, in places where there are not necessarily Jewish people living there or possibly people living right there. So that's just something to open it up. And I've got 1 minute, 2 minutes. Now, although I'm a medievalist, I'm just going to say one very, very quick thing about modern anti-Semitism, which maybe also would invite perhaps some comparative thoughts. And that is that the modern tropes of anti-Semitism have been contradictory. So there is no coherence in the kind of stereotypes and accusations. They're inherently implausible, I guess, for enlightened people because they're contradictory. So Jews are both too rich and too poor. They're both too intelligent and too stupid. They're both capitalist exploiters and communist, suspect communist proletarians. These ideas that are contradictory have nevertheless been able to coexist. And I'm wondering whether it is possible to analyze some of the ideas around Islamophobia also in this way as contradictory, as totally contradictory. Now, a very eminent sociologist who taught for many, many years in Leeds, Zygmunt Bauman, he suggested that these contradictory and somehow irrational stereotypes about Jews are not necessarily the fear of the other, the phobia of the other, but the phobia of that which cannot be categorized. So the other who is far away is sort of safe. But the person who has come here, who has come today, and is here to stay tomorrow, is impossible, is difficult to categorize. Who is he or she? Is he or she one of us or not one of us? Especially when we're talking about generations in transition, perhaps in a historical mode of transition. And so this is not necessarily xenophobia, but what Zygmunt Bauman called proteophobia, the fear of the protein, the fear of that which is impossible to categorize. Because what he suggested is that the human mind and through human language needs to order the confusing world and the very unstable world that we live in into neat categories, inside and outside, clean and dirty, black and white, and so on and so forth. And the stranger who comes today and stays tomorrow threatens these neat categories. And so it's the fear of the protean rather than the fear of the simple stranger that makes for these kind of effects like anti-Semitism and perhaps also Islamophobia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frojmovic, for that thought-provoking talk. If I may be permitted just to respond briefly to the point you made, that I said that both are two sides of the same coin of xenophobia. You actually got close to it by what I meant in your very last point. The fact that even whether in the medieval period or even later on, and this equally applies to the Muslims living in the West as it does to the Jewish population who lived either in Christendom or later on. The fear of the other is not just national of the other. The fear of the other exists today because the other is the one who eats differently, we both eat differently, who believes differently. We all have different beliefs. Who acts differently, sometimes according to what is today, and in the case of the Jewish approach, and later on yours, even by the Greco-Roman were considered barbaric, namely circumcision. Both the Greeks and the Romans considered the Jewish population barbaric because of the act of circumcision. And today in England, both of us are under attack because we perform circumcision. We eat food which comes from different way of slaughtering animals. And that was another thing which was said. We are barbarians because of the way we slaughter animals. And today in England, both kosher and halal are under attack because of this approach. So in many ways, no matter how long one lives in a country, it is proto-fear that when we look at someone else and we see them as dressing differently, when they go to their place of prayer, they pray in a foreign language, as we both do, Arabic and Hebrew. We don't know what they pray to. It's a very odd language they use. They have their methods of dressing is also in some way different, much less in the case of the Jewish community these days, because in many ways many Jews dress like ordinary members of the British community, but certainly, as you said, the Muslim community, not only by the manner of dressing, but also, regrettably, by often the color of the skin, is different from what the majority of the people in England look like. So, therefore, the xenophobia does not necessarily just mean, as far as I understand, although, yes, originally the language meant the fear of the foreigner. But, it really is inclusive of what seems to me as foreign. He, she is foreign in the way they are. Right, I've said my lot. It is now your turn. Please do put up your hands, and that gentleman there, and then that gentleman there. Yes.
So, just first of all, before I was going to say what I was going to say, to come back on that, I don't know sort of exactly what proteophobia means. I'll have to look that up. But is it that it's a fear of that other becoming, embedded within society? So perhaps the processes that led to the ghettoization of Jews in many cities in Europe in the medieval period and beyond, and this fear that what would happen if they were to be among us. Is that what it?
Yeah, because sometimes the other is not so other after all.
Yeah, or if the other was to become less other.
Yes.
Because the issues over, will there be Sharia law in the UK is always one that keeps coming up. Will these systems become normalised to everyone else or forced on everyone else? But what I was going to say is, in terms of the kind of modern Islamic-Jewish relationships, I think one of the things that's quite worrying is what I would say is also a culture and religion thing over the role of Zionism and the Israeli state as regards Jewish society in Britain. So, for example, many people who are opposed to the way that things are going and the military conflict that's happening in Israel and the occupied territories have this charge put against them that they're anti-Semitic. it seems to be a way of closing down debate, and it also happens quite, you know, in the Israeli media there seems to be quite a bit of Islamophobia, you know, directed as it's against the Palestinians, but the Palestinians are mostly Muslims, so I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
It's complicated. It's complicated both ways, I think, because, well, I mean, I live in Britain now, obviously, so the media that I look are the British media, and I find that there is one blank spot that that British media are a little bit reluctant to confront, and that is Britain's historic role in this whole thing. Yeah, and so I think there's a tendency to just bracket that and sort of just, you know, present the sort of the so-called balanced view, which can never make anybody happy. Okay, yes, of course, the media should be balanced, but the balanced view also involves, I think, a kind of a traumatic forgetting of Britain's own role, historical role in creating the Middle East that we have today. And I think until that is fully addressed, I think in a kind of scholarly way, you know, I think it's beginning to be addressed, and it's a very painful process of addressing. You know, there was a film last year, a television series last year. There's been a play this year, you know, a theatre play. Which has caused a lot of controversy, and in some ways, the controversy around these fictionalized accounts of history are probably a good thing, because when you're talking about fictionalized relivings of history, you can shout as much as you want. So, you know, so in that sense, maybe there needs to be more imaginative engagement with this particular past. I don't know if that is useful, but I think, you know, it works both ways, because, you know, there are people who perceive the media's position as being Islamophobic, and there are also people who perceive it as being anti-Semitic. And I think sometimes anti-Semitic tropes do come in. So when tropes around Christ killing and certain ideas about money and certain forms of things to do with well poisoning come in, that's when I sit up and say, hang on a second, these are actually very ancient stereotypes that are being stuck onto a very specific political problem.
I mean, in terms of, I mean, certain media outlets, certain newspapers like to pound from that Sharia is on its way, or Sharia is coming to the, you know, to the UK. I mean, these kind of headlines, you know, are utterly misleading. I mean, if you look at Dr. Rowan Williams, soon to be the former Archbishop of Canterbury, you know, he was criticised for welcoming Sharia in the UK. I mean, his comments were entirely taken out of context. I mean, what he was trying to say is that if we look at divorce and if we look at inheritance issues, it can cost Muslims thousands of pounds, which they don't have readily at their disposal, in terms of paying lawyers' fees and going to court. So you have the Islamic Sharia courts that obviously are not a substitute for the law, but they do, you know, function really well, like Beth Din courts, as far as the Jewish community is concerned. So, you know, Islamic Sharia courts, you know, aspects of Sharia do, you know, benefit to Muslims and as well as the government. I mean, the last thing the government wanted to do, especially in this age of austerity, is spend millions of pounds which they could save through, you know, through Islamic, Sharia courts. So, I mean, to say that Islamic Sharia, Sharia law is creeping in to society is completely misleading. And another point I want to make is that within Kirklees Council, within the area that I live in, there's a particular newspaper that criticised Muslims for putting pressure on the council to ban sausages for school dinners. When there was an investigation carried out, it was nothing to do with Muslims. It was some manager within Kirklees Council that probably had nothing better to do, decided that from now on sausages won't be served to school children within the Kirklees area. But Muslims got criticised in certain local newspapers for being behind this decision. So there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of stereotypes, a lot of information being bandied about that's entirely misleading.
Gentleman there, and then there was a gentleman here. Yes. You. Yes.
Yeah, I've got 2 points here. Since we're talking about anti-Semitism, and from your scholarly point of view, how do you define Semitism first, and what ethnic groups do go under it? This is my first question. And the other point is that, from an Islamic point of view, the death of Jesus, peace be upon him, is a completely different from the same belief held by Christians or Jews. And I think, it might offer a solution for the Jewish people to defend that medieval belief on the Jews being behind the death of Jesus. So this is maybe something that you should do.
Okay. So yeah, so I'm sorry, you're quite right. I should have, just like my colleague, I should have clarified the terminology. I think, okay, there are multi-volume books, works called The History of Anti-Semitism. There's I think the classic is by Leon Polyakov, which was published back in the 60s, possibly 60s or 70s. Okay, so it's a classic. I have a problem with that. I prefer, for the pre-modern period, for the period before the invention of race as a science, I prefer to speak about Judeophobia and not about anti-Semitism. I consider anti-Semitism a kind of post-Christian, in a way, a new departure, because it uses race as science, and therefore claims some kind of a secular scientific respectability. And for those people who invented this notion of anti-Semitism as something, no, it has nothing to do with religion, it's a perfectly scientific, modern, it's modern, right? We're not old-fashioned, we're modern, enlightened people. This was in the 19th century, they were thinking of Jews, and the only reason why they used the Semitism thing was that they didn't want to talk about anti-Judaism. They couldn't foresee, I think, that there would be a significant, a reasonably significant, also Muslim minority. It just wasn't, they were not prophets. They couldn't foresee that this would one day happen. So they were only worried about what was happening then. So in that sense, I would separate, on the one hand, separate medieval Judeophobia from modern anti-Semitism because of this ingredient of race. On the other hand, I think it's also useful to see some continuities in the imaginary, in the imagination, in the imaginary construction of what is being said, such as ideas about well poisoning, the world conspiracy, blood libel, the blood libel which has survived into the modern period. This idea that allegedly Jewish people kill children, non-Jewish, Christian children, for ritual purposes because they need their blood for something. So this has survived. So there are some continuities as well. I hope that addresses.
Yeah, what ethnic groups do go under the? Sorry. What ethnic groups do go under Semitic? What are the Semitic?
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, of course, the whole notion of the Semitic is, I think, as far as I know, an 18th century linguistic invention, which of course the Semitic languages.
If you look at Genesis, I think it's 10.1. Shem, yeah.
Shem,
Arabs,
how many Yafet?
Arabs, Jews, many people miss this point. The anti-Semite is only used for Jews. I mean, I was speaking to a colleague of mine and he was quite surprised that Arabs come into the bracket of Semites. So this is a point that gets overlooked quite frequently. And
yes, it's so in some ways you know, it's a complete misnomer in a way, because it was invented to specifically capture Jews, and it was especially addressed to. It became particularly dangerous when Jewish people in 19th, 20th century Europe, some of them, you know, many of them were not at all religious. They were completely secularized, completely secular, behaved and dressed and, you know, ate, in fact, in every respect like that. And so this term was invented to say, nevertheless, there is something in the body which has nothing to do with religion, which cannot be washed away even by conversion. Even by conversion to Christianity, this Semitic race cannot be washed away, so to speak. And so that's what makes that's what made that term very dangerous at that time, and up to, of course, including after World War II. Yeah. But yes, if you take the word in its strict sense, then of course the Semit, you know, based on Shem, one of the sons of Noah, the Semitic peoples and also and especially languages include Arabic, Hebrew, some of the Amharic, Ethiopian language.
Gentleman there, and then Tasif. So yes, yes.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for this very thought-provoking talk. This is topic of my PhD actually, so I just would like to share a few points, if your audience allow me, which might be of interest to everybody. I did some research with Professor Max Faller, who actually lives in Chapeltown, and he is extensive writing about the Jewish movement in this area. I think one of the problem, as Dr. Abdul-Basit said, is the media. Although I'm a bit skeptical of this term, the media, because within that there are different people and different newspapers. Not everybody is, phobic or whatever. I think the so far what I have, come across, I will be wrong. This is both Islamophobia and anti-Semitism is kind of agenda of certain class, elite, or they are in politics or in media. They use over and over whenever is needed, and there is a kind of Islamophobia within Muslim countries as well. If it's to do with as Dr. Basit said, the same Quraysh people is when they see something is going away, like dictators and others. The main point is like if you see the local media during the time of July and June, which is coming again, they often forgot or intentionally ignored to talk to anybody from Concord or from Together for Peace or from Radio Salam Shalom or a Dialogue Society, or you can say any member of Makkah Mosque, because these people are not welcome, because they have different kind of positive approach to this. However, in the mainstream media, they are, I don't know, they always talk to, for example, a guy, there are self-declared scholars like Anjum Chaudhry. Everybody knows.
I'm sorry, what is the question?
I'm just sharing this my last question.
Oh.
I'm not asking.
Oh, I see. Right.
So the whole point is, okay, I just sum up. Whole point is, do you think is there anything that the Muslim can learn from the Jewish community, which is very important? I did talk to Nigel Brazard of the Jewish community here, because the Jewish community in Leeds, they've gone through the same media experience, media portraying them as other. So is there any sort of committee or forum of journalists, local and mainstream, to tackle this issue? That's it. Thank you.
With the media, I've had experience with the media. I was contacted by BBC Asian Network about 9 months ago, asking for my thoughts on the Gujarat riots in India, Hindu-Muslim riots. And I gave a radio interview They never played the interview, never appeared on radio. And the reason, and I was quite surprised why it didn't appear on the radio, but I can only assume that it didn't appear on the radio is because I didn't have anything controversial to say. Had I said something controversial, I'm sure it would have been plastered all over the radio and the network. So good news is, good positive news is not the media don't recognize it. They don't see the point of airing it or putting it into print because it doesn't make them any money. It doesn't get them any headlines. Negative headlines is the business of the media. That's why you see certain newspapers, Sharia is on its way to the UK. It's not hardly surprising that these headlines do generate interest, controversy, and sell papers. You only have to look at the case of Leicester, the two fat ladies. I don't know if you read the Daily Mail article. The two fat ladies, I think they come on television as a program, and one of them went to Leicester, and they were trying to promote the book, and they said Leicester was such an alien place. They actually went past a mosque, and they made a few negative remarks. The whole purpose of them making the negative remarks was to sell the book. But the amount of damage it did to Leicester, that the whole national media converged on Leicester, talked to the Three Faiths Forum. Ibrahim Mogra gave an article saying that those remarks have caused such a problem in Leicester that people are just talking about this issue in Leicester, that it's being portrayed in such a negative manner. So this is just examples in the media. The only thing Muslims can do in general is to basically at a local level and a national level get more involved in things like interfaith communities, interfaith relations. And basically, I've seen in Dewsbury as well that there's some Muslim brothers and sisters have stalls where they stand, in all weathers, trying to give the message of Islam. So I think practical steps, and as well as getting involved in bodies and organizations in order to portray the true view of Islam, I think that's more constructive. And I think one shouldn't worry about the media too much, because if one gets preoccupied with that, then you stop doing the work at grassroots level.
Tasif, you want to talk?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I just had two questions. The first one was just formalize the first question I was asked, and it's in regards to how do you differentiate between legitimate criticisms of Islam and Judaism / the state of Israel and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. So what are the boundaries? What is an acceptable criticism of Muslims of Islam? Because I think this is at the heart of what we're trying to discuss here. Is that some people may say that Islamophobia or anti-Semitism is just something which is used to silence critics of Israel or of Islam. So how do we differentiate between the two, so legitimate criticisms and illegitimate ones? And the second question is mainly with the presentation by Dr. Shaikh. I think you spoke about Islamophobia mainly as it's manifested by thugs and people in the margins of society, we would say. But what do you have to say about the institutionalization of Islamophobia in means of actual state policy, or even within higher forms, so whether it's in political parties, whether it's in the policies of the state? For example, the Prevent agenda, which is seen by some as being Islamophobic, targeting Muslims, specific laws which are implemented in airports, etc. So how do you see this? The famous example is the UKIP recently was criticized by its own founder for being Islamophobic. And UKIP is a mainstream political party. Obviously, this is just in Britain, not even looking at Eastern Europe and Central Europe, institutionalization of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism to some extent. So how would you address that level of Islamophobia?
I think the first part goes to you and the second part goes to you. So would you like to answer the first part?
Again, it's complicated and it depends on where the person you ask stands politically. But I'll give you a couple of examples. Maybe that's easier than a general. I'm a lecturer here, so I'm a member of the union. What's it called now? Universities and College Union.
UCU.
Yes, UCU. And I've noticed that of all the terrible conflicts that happen in the world, the last, I don't know, 10 years that I've been a member, the only conflict that they seem to pour their foreign policy energies into has to do with Israel-Palestine. Now, it's marvelous that they are so, active, but I do worry that they're paying no attention at all to genocide in Rwanda, gross human rights violations in China, and things like that. It does worry me a little bit that are on a much, on a really, much bigger scale of atrocity. So I feel bad for the Rwandan people, and I feel bad for the political, the people who have no rights to express their political freedom of speech in China. I feel bad for them that the UCU is not paying any attention to them. Can you see what I'm suggesting? Okay, that kind of thing. I went to one of their debates, and a very serious scientist suggested that, in fact, suggested that the problems of the whole world can be condensed in this particular problem of the Middle East, that this is the biggest problem in the world, and that it's in fact causing all the other problems in the world. Can you see what I'm suggesting? Yeah? So, that is where I get worried. But is that a partial answer?
Yeah, but could you touch upon how would it be developed, not a framework, but an understanding of what legitimate criticism of Islam as well? So, when it says, Islam promotes terrorism, or Muslims are more likely to be violent than others, at which point do they accept the criticism?
The problem is one has to push people to really study and not just make these blanket generalizations. And that's hard work. Nobody wants to do this hard work of actually reading the political analyses and of distinguishing where there might be a regime that perhaps might be supporting a particular terrorist organization and others aren't, this is hard work, and nobody wants to do the hard work. Everybody wants to just jump to a quick conclusion, and that's where one has to really push people to really go out and study. Is that?
Yeah.
I'd like to
add something else.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of distinguishing legitimate criticism, if you look at the case of the video that was made by the Egyptian American on Muhammad, you had two extremes where you had people attacking US embassies, the murder of the ambassador in Tripoli. That's not, Islam doesn't portray that. So the problem is, you have to look at individual level, you have people hijack the situation for their own personal, religious, political motives, and you have other people that look at it rationally. I've been fortunate to come to this university, and I've studied the Abrahamic faith, and I think the best way to counter issues caused by this particular individual in America is through Muslims should basically study more, should study other religions, other faiths, other cultures, and see, and then basically investigate the issues at hand, rather than basically react in a hostile in a hostile manner. Muslims need to also look at themselves to be quite truthful, and need to basically look at things more in a rationalized, civilized manner, rather than resort to violence all the time. Muslims need to basically be aware that that video that was made on the Prophet Muhammad wasn't just the first video or remarks, insults towards the Prophet. It's happened over many thousands of years, and many Muslims are not aware of this. They think this is the first thing that's occurred, or Salman Rushdie's satanic verses was the second most important thing ever to happen that was aimed at Muslims. There's history shows, is testament that many people have insulted Islam and Muslims over centuries, but Muslims are not aware of this. So Muslims need to basically study other cultures and religions, And this is why people say that Islam is in need of the enlightenment. This is why people say this, because when they see Muslims reacting in this manner, they see Islam is in need of the enlightenment. It isn't. Islam had its enlightenment period many thousands of years ago. You have to look at Spain, look at the contributions of Muslims in all fields of science and technology to see what, how Muslims were so learned and so civilized, or the pioneers of science and technology, many hundreds of years ago.
May I just add something, as both the ideology of Joseph Interfaith Foundation and also my experience as someone who's been involved in this field now for nearly 30 years. And it seems to me there are two responses to your question. One is, when criticisms are made of any community, whether religious community or a minority community or whatever, the Jewish or Muslim makes no difference. But in this case, I will limit to Jews and Muslims, as it is to do with the foundation. It is incumbent upon the members of the community to question themselves and their approach and their behavior and how they portray themselves to the greater public. So to reflect on those matters, I think, is the responsibility of each minority, or in majority, doesn't make a difference. However, to make statements about religion, culture, color, even sexual orientation or anything else, if the aim is merely to create hatred towards that particular group, in other words, if the statement comes under what now we call hate crime or hate speech, so I would say something against group A which aims to create hatred, dislike, fear towards that group, then that criticism is unjust. In fact, that is not criticism, that is a hateful speech. If a criticism is made as what is termed positive criticism, i.e., it criticizes, for instance, in the case of Israel, if the criticism is made against certain policies of the government of Israel in relation to Palestinians, in relation to Africa, North, or Europe, or America, or anywhere else, and it is said as a positive criticism, though it is a criticism, then that is not anti-Semitic. If it is stated in such a way, such as statements that are made by Mr. Ahmadinejad, where he simply, as person who has never studied Holocaust or the history of the Holocaust, or doesn't know it, or ever has met somebody who is a survivor of the Holocaust, then he simply stands up and says, well, this is all nonsense, Holocaust never happened, then that is hate speech. So there is a difference between the two. Does that make any kind of sense? Do you want to?
No, I think the challenge was to kind of where do we draw the line between hate speech and positive and constructive criticism? But I think you've done that quite well.
I mean, I think it depends on I think it's a hard thing to define, because it all comes down to the individual. Like, if somebody was to insult Islam or Muslims in front of me, I wouldn't resort to violence, or I wouldn't resort to basically engaging in the same manner, because I mean, I've been fortunate to receive an education. I consider myself an educated, civilized person, it all depends on the reaction of the individual. You see, a lay person, a lay Muslim, I'm not making excuses for a lay Muslim, but they will react the way they are, because if they've not had exposure to the cultures of the peoples, of the traditions, they will react in that manner. It's all about how you work within your own community, within your own faith, to basically show them that, you know, there is a bigger world out there. Not the world that you live in is not just the entire world. There's a big world out there. There's different people and there's different cultures, and it's all about. I think education is the most important thing for all people's concerned.
Next question. I think allow the lady to go and then the gentleman. Is that okay? Okay.
Sorry, you just mentioned about like injustice and stuff when talking about like hate crime and stuff. Like, how do you justify then groups like the EDL, where the government actually allows them to stand on the street and completely, it's basically hate speech? How are they allowed to then do that? And then how do you tackle issues like such as that? And like, I remember once seeing a YouTube video, they even had like a Jewish division as part of the EDL march, and how are they allowed to do that? And the guy dressed up as a rabbi. So how do you tackle it in that situation? Like, if it was another group being attacked, then the government might actually say something, but when the government aren't themselves doing anything, they're allowing these marches to continue, etc., then how do you tackle that? So,
I don't know this. I didn't know this.
Okay, you answer that and I answer.
Right. I mean, I've had indirect dealings with the EDL, and basically, I live in a town called Batley. It's about 15 miles away from Leeds, and there's a town called Dewsbury. I think many of you may have heard of it due to connections with 7/7 and the Shannon Matthews case. The EDL, every year they make it's like every year they come to Dewsbury. It costs the taxpayer £500,000 every year for these people to come. They're ferried in by coach. They have a static march, or this time they were allowed to basically demonstrate in front of the town hall. And because I'm a member of the local community, I was invited by the police the day before to air concerns, because many non-Muslims and Muslims had concerns about the damage that the EDL does to many towns and cities up and down the country. And one of the questions I had for the police was, who were in charge of the stewarding operation, the whole operation to prevent violence in the town on that particular day in July. And one of the questions I made was that, what if they make statements that insult religion or incitement to racial hatred? And the police assured us that the speeches would actually be monitored, and if any of the speakers were found to incite racial or religious hatred, they would be prosecuted. They would be prosecuted. And on that particular day, Tommy Robinson's right-hand man, Kevin Carroll, all he talked about in Dewsbury was the Egyptian revolution and what the Muslim Brotherhood was going to do. But the people standing in front of him were the local people. They were so drunk that I don't think they had a clue in terms of who Muhammad Mehri was and who the Brotherhood was. And the whole event just was basically a damp squib. But the problem it did, the effects of that march was every time they come to Dewsbury, they do damage to trade. Dewsbury traders lose money. And secondly, it cost taxpayers £500,000, and up and down the country, it's actually costing so much money, and that money could be better used, for projects to help people get into employment and be using community cohesion projects and bring communities together. But the EDL does have a right to freedom of speech, like with anybody else, but it's got to be responsible free speech at the same time.
You specifically mentioned that EDL and its Jewish, it calls it a Jewish division, yes. One thing I am delighted, as I'm sure all of you are, that the number of the membership of EDL actually has gone down, and its influence has gone down, particularly since its leader, I forget.
Tommy Robinson.
No, the one who is invited to the BBC. That's right, Nick Griffin, the BNP, was invited to BBC, and Baroness Worsey gave an excellent riposte to his nonsense. Now the EDL which regularly holds actually marches and so on in East London. And we work very closely with various mosques in East London. It actually, since the war in Gaza, not this recent war, but the war before, about 3 years ago, it started flowing Israeli flags. Each time it would hold a march or a demonstration or something, you would see huge Israeli flags being flown about. And it started saying that they have a Jewish division. Now, it was actually communicated to the Joseph Interfaith Foundation through our contacts that this is causing misunderstanding among certain sections of the Muslim community, as one would understand, because they are saying if there is a Jewish division and if they are flowing Israeli flag, then one would assume that A, they are supported by Israel, and B, therefore they are supported by Jews in Britain. What are you going to do about it? So the Council of Imams and Rabbis got together, discussed this, and we wrote officially to every Jewish rabbinic organization in the whole of the kingdom. And we said, what do you say in these two organizations? And this is, you can see it's on the website. We received actual official statements. First of all, the Jewish division consisted of one woman, one Jewish woman. Regrettably, there is no guarantee that if you are Jewish, you cannot be stupid. So I wish it were so, but it isn't so. So to be stupid is to join the EDL as a Jew. It's like a turkey voting for Christmas. The only reason that EDL does not speak hatefully towards the Jews exactly in the same term as they do against the Muslims is because they know that the Jewish community is very strong and well organized and will take them to court and absolutely wipe the floor off with them. So they target the Muslims because it's a soft target at the moment. Don't wait. We are organizing also and getting there slowly, but we're getting there. Now, every rabbinic council in Britain wrote back officially to us, including the board of the Jewish deputies, to state that they absolutely disapprove of EDL, disagree with its ideology, consider it a what's the word when you are a racist organization, and that in no way do they approve of the Israeli flag being flown, but regrettably there isn't a law that you can actually stop them from flowing any flag that they want. They can flow the American flag, that's the sort of thing. But this was then sent to the Home Secretary officially to state that there is no Jewish group, organization, religious or secular whatsoever within this country that supports EDL. So thank you for raising this point. Yes, it does cause misunderstanding, and if you've noticed, for the last 10 months, EDL does not flow the Israeli flag anymore, nor does it talk about its Jewish division. I think one woman, I know women are powerful, but even that, one woman cannot make a Jewish division, but thank you. The gentleman there, yes, you've been very patient, thank you.
Thank the speakers first of all, it was a very interesting, particularly very interesting discussion in Singapore. I want there is a question, but there's a bit of a prologue if that's all right. I think that maybe one of the things that holds back some of the sort of thinking about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism is this word which has come up, irrational, and the idea that you have irrational fears or irrational hatred or anger. It occurs to me that there is always a rationale. The question is whether or not we understand, appreciate, or maybe want to appreciate it. But there's always something there, and I think that when you're looking at different events historically, Dr. Frojmovic pointed this out specifically. I think it certainly has to apply to both. That it might be an anachronistic assertion or assumption to sort of claim that different things going on, the sort of heterogeneity of different events going on historically are somehow part of a whole. It's almost a sort of strange metaphysical kind of idea that there is, through time, Islamophobia or anti-Semitism. And I wonder if this also applies, Dr. Shaikh, to your point about the birth of Islam, with the early tribal oppositions, and whether we can really count that as Islamophobia. But going on from that and moving towards my question, one of the strong rationales, I think, for both is the inability of individuals to understand, to make divisions and understand specifics, and instead there's a tendency to generalize. And it's a sort of psychological and psychologically understandable thing. We generalize because it's much easier to see something simply than it is to see something in its nuances and in its complexity. So when Israel does something, Jews are blamed because Israel is seen. It's a very, very, very simplistic view. When a Muslim terrorist commits an atrocity, Muslims are blamed. So it's this sort of very general idea, and there are certainly Jewish communities that I'm aware of, which, if I were to also engage in this sort of generalization, that the Jewish communities under whose jurisdiction I would never want to live, and I'm sure also Islamic communities under whose jurisdiction a lot of moderate Muslims would not want to live. So I wonder, finally getting to the question, I'm afraid, what can the moderate voices, what can the moderate Muslims and the moderate Jews do to break down these generalizations and to actively work against the more extreme factions within on both sides there, which are sort of the source of these generalizations?
Well, I just want to thank you for interrogating the irrational term, because it's obviously to label something irrational is meant to discredit it, and it is obviously based on a particular ideology which privileges rationality and the so-called scientific outlook. And as we mentioned earlier, there was a time when race was considered a valid, completely rational science. So we've got to be very, very careful. What is rational is a bit of a movable feast, isn't it? So maybe, so I agree with you there. And in fact, I would probably follow the ideas of Zygmunt Bauman, which I brought up earlier, who suggests that actually there can be stereotypes that are contradictory, but they are within themselves perfectly rational and plausible. They're part of a rational system. So in that sense, to call something irrational is probably not a way forward. It's not, it's just a quick slap, but it doesn't really lead to a lasting analysis.
I'm going to make a controversial statement now regarding the use of the word moderate. I mean, I really get annoyed when the media and politicians and government say moderate Muslims are the way forward. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there's no such a thing as a moderate Muslim. It's just a term that's been invented by the media to basically cause schisms and show different types of Muslims. I mean, a Muslim having a long beard down to here and wearing the traditional garment, he can be a moderate Muslim like a Muslim in a 200-pound suit. I mean, don't judge, they say don't judge a book by its cover, and don't stereotype or generalize people, because you don't know what, until you speak to someone, until you have a dialogue, you really don't know what they stand for. And I mean, in terms of this issue about the media are always going to show Anjan Chowdhury as the face of Islam. They're never going to show an imam who engages in interfaith relations with Jews and Christians and other communities. He's never going to be presented as the true face of Islam, because that's not going to do the business for the media. I mean, you are quite right that the agenda has been hijacked by so-called extremists in all walks of life. But as I was saying in my presentation, that all Muslims need to educate themselves, need to learn about other faiths and other cultures, and engage in dialogue, because this is the only way forward in terms of community cohesion and bringing people together.
Next question. Very briefly.
Sorry. Yes, I just want to clarify that there was no stereotype. I wasn't driving at any particular category of Muslim or Jew who I would call a moderate or an extremist. I would prefer to categorize them according to our understanding of the word moderate, and then apply it to the person, rather than looking at the person and saying, does this person look like, on the Jewish side, do they wear a black hat, and do they have a big beard also? That person isn't necessarily also an extremist in this sense. But what we're talking about in terms of tackling this fear and the generalizations, what we're really discussing is the politics of the situation. Because these Jewish communities under whose jurisdiction, as I said, I wouldn't want to live there because of their some political views, how they implement their religious views in the way that they actually regulate society, and their laws and their political approaches to other bodies as well. So I would apply that equally to the Islamic communities, rather than saying a certain type of community is this because of their degree of religiosity.
Thank you. Any question from the young ladies? We haven't had any from you.
We have.
Just one. So, anybody wants to make any comments or ask any questions?
No pressure.
No pressure whatsoever. Not at all. Anybody? No. We'll come back. Yes. Next question, please. Oh, you want to make
No, sorry, the gentleman wanted the
gentleman wanted a question.
He's asked my question about a fashion now, so I've got
Do you want to ask it yourself?
Oh, it's been asked.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. If not, then perhaps, as it is 7:30, Fawzia, yes, there is a questionnaire, I'm afraid. There is no goodies without. And we would be grateful if you would fill in the questionnaire and return it to us. We need to know, because Joseph Interfaith Foundation is now asking whether you would like such seminars to be held again at your university. We normally so far have worked with London universities, and so we have a continuation of working with those universities. This is the first time in Leeds, so we would welcome your suggestions, your feedbacks, whatever you like. So please answer it, criticize us, question us, but please answer us. Also, there are certain number of books of the Confronting Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia here tonight. In case there isn't enough for all the students, if you would let Fawzia, I think that's the best case, yes? If you let Fawzia know. Okay, see, if you let Fawzia know, then we will send some more, and you can collect it from Fawzia. Is that okay? Everybody knows Fawzia?
If you don't have a book.
Okay.
No worries.
Okay. Just in case you don't have our email address, I must do this before I thank. First of all, let me thank ISOC very, very much for very kindly accepting to be our partner in tonight's seminars. All our seminars at universities are held in partnership with ISOC. So thank you for tonight, and thank you to Fozia for doing a great deal of work on this. I also would like to thank very much both our speakers, Dr. Frojmovic, Dr. Shaikh, and I believe we have now been joined by Dr. Alafandi, to whom I originally wrote, and very welcome, Doctor, and thank you for your help, because I know you've also been trying to do that. It remains me to thank all of you for coming tonight, for filling in the questionnaires, and please do get in touch. It's very, very easy. Info, you're all internet generation, not like us oldies. Info at Joseph Interfaith Foundation, all one word, .org. Or if you just Google Joseph Interfaith, all our contacts will come up. Write to us, write to Tasif, write to me, contact Fozia, and I'm sure she'll pass the information to us. And we'll be delighted to help in whichever way you like. And we look forward to seeing you soon again. Thank you very much.
One last announcement before everyone goes. Hey guys, so I'm Lucy, I'm the Faith Rep, and I'm also on the JSOC committee. Next week, on the 3rd of December, we're having a talk all about circumcision. It would be great if as many people from different societies come along, especially as it's like quite a big issue that's affecting Muslims and Jews today. So, that would be great. It's in the business school. You will see these up around the union, so it would be really great to see as many as possible. Thanks.
Do you have a pen?
You have a spare pen?
Almost a pen.
You're right.
Okay. Thanks.
No, you sign it. That's it.
I'm gonna
Come to the library. Excellent. Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.
and let my professor know that.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to meet you. I got a book and I'm sure I'll be contacted because I'm trying to run these events. These ones are once a month, so I'm sorry I've got to run. But thank you so much. That's great.
I can't My battery's dead.
You've gone to shut it down, and it's amazing.
Are you finished with that? Yeah. What's up, bro? Why are you playing Inception games on me, man? Huh? Why are you playing Inception games on me?
Anyway, I'm going home, so see you. Take care. So I'll see you later. Are you watching?
Come, let's go back home.
Where's the video? I want to see it. There's only one question though. About, like, I didn't ask him because I didn't know for sure.
What the
denial of Holocaust family.
Fine, but I don't know what history is. If you tell me to which address to send it to, then I'll be able to give you a flag and everything, you know.
Can you show me where Ahmadinejad saying that he denied the Holocaust?
You said, I saw you research on it.
But I write it.
She was just sitting next to me.